Gentlemen, welcome back. Today I will show you this brand new e-bike that I built from scratch. We'll start from the ground up. I'll take you through the specs and then we'll take it for a test ride. So for starters, we have the tires. In the front we have the Maxxis Minion DHF, and in the rear of course we have the Maxxis Minion DHR2. Both these tires are 3C Max Terra. 3C being triple compound, we have the hardest compound in the casing for stability, the softest on the lugs, and then the center lugs are somewhere in between. These are high volume knobby tires intended for downhill mountain bike racing. These are some of the grippiest, most performant tires in the market, which is important when your bike is extremely powerful. To this day, guys still win championships with these tires. For the rims, of course, we have custom-made carbon fiber, which surprisingly not that much more expensive than aluminum. The nice thing about carbon fiber is it's lightweight and stiff. Now the lightweight nature isn't very important for this bike because it's heavy to begin with, but the stiffness certainly is. These rims do not bend, they do not flex, they do not give whatsoever. They're the stiffest rims I've ever seen. And you definitely notice it when you're riding, in a good way, of course. For the spokes, we have stainless steel spokes because who wants corrosion? That's no fun. For the motor, we have the QS 3000 watt hub motor. This is one of the biggest motors available on the market today. Very common in high power e-bikes. This thing weighs 12.5 kilograms and produces up to, give or take, 360 Newton meters of torque. At least with my setup. And that would equate to approximately 1 G of acceleration, so extremely torquey. That motor is powered by our controller. This is the Sabaton BLDC sine wave programmable controller. This particular model does 72 volts at 200 battery amps, so a total nominal power of 14.4 kilowatts. Just for perspective, normal e-bikes are typically in the range of 250 to 500 watts. So this thing is way more powerful than anything else on the road, typically. I mounted the controller to the outside just to save room on the inside and also to provide cooling. This thing's pretty high quality. In fact, when it's driving that motor, even at full power, the motor itself at least, and the controller, makes less noise than my 300 watt e-bike. And of course, this controller, aside from 200 battery amps, we also get 450 phase amps to the actual motor, and that results in a very high torque output. The battery is something we'll get to later. All you need to know now is that it takes up most of this compartment. It's pretty heavy and it consists of 480 18650 cells harvested from Lime scooter packs. This battery has a nominal capacity of 5.5 kilowatt hours, which is, usually over a dozen times bigger than any normal e-bike. Moving on the front for suspension, we have Triple Crown D&M forks. These are coil forks, so a little bit of adjustments available, but nothing crazy. They do work really well with this bike, despite the fact that they are budget forks. The suspension travel on these is 200 millimeters, so this bike can pretty much eat up any bumps. On the back, we have something similar. We have a D&M coil shock. This thing could be a little stiffer in an ideal world, but again, it works just fine. Suspension travel on the back is probably around 160 millimeters, so still pretty high. For accessories, we have full motorcycle style lighting, including daytime running lights, low beam, high beam, turn signals left and right, and even hazards, which is kind of unusual. The turn signals are integrated into the headlight and integrated into the tail light, so we don't have anything sticking out. And on the front, not that it's terribly useful, we do have a little motorcycle style horn. The last thing of note on this is the accessory panel. We actually have a 12 volt cigarette style lighter. Not that that's ever come in handy, but it's nice to have. And on the other side, we have XT60 connectors, one of them for battery charging, and also you could power accessories with it. and then we have one for 12 volts high current output. So let's say we're ready to ride. Starting this thing up should be pretty simple. We just walk up. I'll put my thumb on the fingerprint sensor, nice to not have to deal with keys. The lights will blink, but we're actually only in the secondary power mode. And the reason why is because the kickstand is down when I put my thumb there. Now this power mode's handy because we have access to power things like the lights and the accessory panel without actually worrying about anyone being able to make the bike move. But if we do want to get into the actual riding mode, I need to put my thumb on here again. It'll do its thing again. And now the display will turn on and we're in the full ignition state. Even in this state, twisting the throttle won't actually do anything, and the reason why is because the kickstand is down. The kickstand has this sensor here, which when it is engaged will tell the bike not to do anything, just as a safety feature. So the first thing you notice when you get on the bike and actually start riding it is the seat height. In particular, this bike has a pretty high seat height. The reason behind that is it's twofold. Number one, we have a lot of suspension travel, and when you have a bike that has a lot of suspension travel, you need a lot of ground clearance. Now on a bicycle, when you adjust your seat height, normally you would adjust it so that at the bottom of the pedal stroke your leg is straight. Now initially that's what I did on this bike. However, that presented a problem when it came to actually controlling the bike. So what would happen is when the seat height was too high, the center of gravity of the whole bike was effectively too high. It was too hard to control the bike, it was too hard to control in corners, and also it was prone to popping wheelies a lot because of the high center of gravity. Now since then I've given up on having my leg be straight at the bottom of the pedal stroke, and I've opted to lower the seat. And it is still a little hard to control at times, but I would say that it's gotten a lot more manageable. Now the next thing that's pretty noticeable about this bike is just how quiet it really is. The only real source of noise on this bike is the tires and the freewheel. There's no engine. The motor and controller don't make any noise, so what we're left with is a bike that's actually relatively quiet. Now of course, if I wanted the bike to be even quieter, I could opt for smoother or perhaps even slick tires. Now of course the problem is I would be sacrificing the go anywhere nature of this bike, and that's not a sacrifice that I'm willing to make. Quite possibly the biggest selling point of this bike is the power. I mean, this thing is really powerful. In particular, the top speed of this bike is, around 100 kilometers an hour, which is quite fast for something with pedals on it. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why do you need a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour? The answer is you don't. It's just nice to have. We've got a little bit of washy gravel, but that's not really a problem for our bike with our tires. I like this route. It's scenic. There's hardly anyone out here, even at peak times. Of course, there's not a lot to actually do out here, but maybe that's part of the appeal. Nice little floating bridge. Now, that power doesn't just extend to a top speed, it also extends to torque. Now because this thing's electric, I can actually choose, even on a steep hill, I can choose to go as slowly as I want, or I can go as quickly as I want. That is of course a result of having 100% of the torque available at 0 RPM and having ultimate control over the power output of the motor. That's not something that you could do in something that had a gas engine in it, because of course if you go too slow, you're riding the clutch, and if you ride the clutch, you burn the clutch. So it's just another perk of having, an electric bike. Very strong crosswind today. Not that you guys can really hear it on the mic, but it is. So now that we're somewhere a little bit more quiet, maybe it's time to start talking about sort of the next aspect of the bike, and that of course is the range. Now that's a very common question. I would say anytime you own electric vehicles, people will ask you, well, what's the range? Short answer I would say is, for this particular bike, if we're going say 30 kilometers an hour, we have a range of 420 kilometers. And if I'm going 50 kilometers an hour, then the range drops to 200 kilometers. Now the reasoning behind that is, well, with any vehicle, but most especially a two-wheeled vehicle, most of the power losses are going to be in wind resistance. So in particular, if I'm going 30 kilometers an hour and then I opt to go 60 kilometers an hour, well, I'm doubling my speed. And what will happen when I double my speed? Well, I'm going to hit twice as many air molecules and I'll hit them twice as quickly. And so that translates to a force pushing me back of 4 times as much. Now, because I'm going twice as fast, to actually exert that force requires twice as much energy. So to go twice as fast, you need roughly 8 times the power. And then on a per unit distance basis, that translates into 4 times the energy. So that's why we see such a steep drop off in range going from 30 kilometers an hour to 50 kilometers an hour. It is nice just to have how much power this has and how sporty it is and how well the brakes work and whatnot. Alright, it's time to get set up for a good old-fashioned top speed run. So as you can see, the bike is actually pretty fast, and even though it's relatively quiet, the noise that it does make actually sounds pretty cool, a bit like a small jet engine. In this shot, you can actually see the weight shift to the back as I hit the throttle, which causes the front suspension to decompress and the rear contact patch to expand. Let's pause the video for a minute when the logos on the wheels are fully aligned. If we actually play the video again and then pause after a full revolution of the front wheel, you can actually see that the rear wheel has turned faster than the front wheel due to the tire slip caused by the acceleration. This slip is actually the main cause of tire wear. It's just interesting to see it on camera like this. Alright, so now that we're done with the top speed run, we can start to wrap things up. I just want to start by saying that the last thing that I really like about this bike is actually the style. As you can see, this thing looks quite serious, and personally I think that it's actually rather tastefully proportioned too. With how this bike looks, it does tend to attract a little bit of attention, and sometimes too much attention is actually a bad thing. So I've opted, of course, for a black on black color scheme to help manage that, and it helps, but of course, the paint job isn't everything. Still though, I think that it's at a manageable level, and I think that I've struck a good balance between style and maintaining a low profile. And overall, I'm actually really pleased with how this bike looks. Now, as promised, it's time to take a look at some of the internals. This battery is actually insulated. I've taken a few pieces out just to better show what's inside. And that insulation even extends to the side panels. This insulation job didn't go as well as I would have planned, but presumably it will still do some good. Now with the insulation, the battery actually has these heating pads installed, which operate to keep the battery at 5 degrees Celsius or above at all times. Now the reason for this is twofold. Number one, it improves the performance of the battery, as a cold battery can't deliver as much power as a warm battery can. But number two, and much more importantly, it allows the battery to charge at all times. Without this system, if the bike was left outside in freezing weather and the battery was below freezing, the only way to charge it would be to bring it back inside and allow it to warm up before charging, which could take a really long time. But with the system, the bike can be charged at all times. Now, aside from that, we of course have a battery management system which helps to manage the battery and protect it from short circuits and over discharging and things like that. Now, the real brains of this whole operation is actually up here. It's a small computer board which I designed myself, and this board is essentially based off of an Arduino Nano, and it has MOSFETs on it, which you can think of as essentially electronic switches. And all it really is at its core is it's a bunch of wires going in, serving as inputs, and then wires going out, serving as outputs. So inputs might be things like the fingerprint reader or the handlebar switches or things like that. And outputs might be things like the controller or the lights. With this board, I can essentially program the bike to do whatever I want. If I didn't have this board, I'd have to do all of this with relays. The compartment would be full of them, and the wiring would be obviously a lot more like a rat's nest than what it is right now. And even then, it still wouldn't be able to do half the things that this computer board can do. Now, if there is enough demand for a product like this computer board, I actually might opt to design one and sell it commercially. Of course, the commercial version would have to be a bit more polished than the one that I have here, but it is an idea that I'm thinking about. Another key feature of this bike is actually the wiring harness. I built a custom harness that starts from the front of the bike at the headlight all the way through to the controller. This harness serves to hook everything up in a very neat and orderly manner, and without it, the wiring would be, quite frankly, a nightmare. This harness is actually made out of silicone insulated copper wire. This type of insulation is resistant to high temperatures and chemicals, and it's very flexible. Now, the only problem with this is that the insulation tends to be a little bit soft and not the most durable. So were I to do this again, I might actually look into using PTFE insulated wire. Otherwise, that's about it. The only other comment and thing that we have installed in here is our 12-volt converter, which operates to convert the battery voltage down to 12 volts for powering all of our 12-volt accessories and our 12-volt panel. All right, so that just about covers everything that I wanted to showcase about the bike. I do still have plenty of footage, so I could create a detailed build log, and I do actually have some adventures planned with this bike coming up in the future. So if any of that interests you, I'd encourage you to check out my extras channel linked below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.